a lot of jewelry, and also tools of women have been offered to the goddess.
During the earliest human occupation of the site, people worshipped a formless pagan deity that ruled over sexuality, childbirth, and nurturing. Then in time, the deity began to acquire human features as worshippers merged primitive paganism with their belief in the Greek goddess Artemis.
She is the great nurturer of human life, as the protectress for women of nature. And the adherence to the worship of Artemis drew a tremendous amount of emotional energy. In many respects, to me, the Temple of Artemis speaks of the deep religiosity, the deep sacredness, the deep feelings to this grand mother of humanity.
As the fame of the Temple of Artemis spread, pilgrims brought offerings from distant lands from as far away as India, Persia, and Spain. The temple accumulated a vast treasure trove of precious metals and exotic jewelry. Even King Croesus, whose wealth was legendary, was granted a line of credit by the local priests. In return, he donated lavishly to the exquisite decoration of the temple. It was not long before the building and its contents were recognized as one of the wonders of the known world. But even that was not enough. To increase its stature, work was eventually begun on a lavish new temple, destined to eclipse its predecessor.
The columns alone were 60 feet high. That's not even counting the pediment on the top. So from ground level, you had a 10-meter podium, 60 feet of columns. Then you get your pediment and your entablature, and add another 20 to 30 feet, and it was the size of a football field. And yet it was so airy and so open, and it stood singularly within a beautiful deep bay, and you couldn't miss it when you came into Ephesus. You could see it from 5-8 miles out at sea. It would just glimmer, especially when the sun switched over to the west when it starts to set.
One of the temple's greatest riddles was the way in which the goddess Artemis was depicted. For centuries, scholars have debated the meaning of her strange attire. What were these provocative shapes? Were they multiple breasts? Or were they dates or eggs, or even bull's testicles, all symbols of fertility? The rituals practiced within the temple were as puzzling as the goddess herself.
Only a privileged few would have actually had access into the inner chamber of the temple itself. There was a complete hierarchy of priests and priestesses and dedicated virgins who would serve time in the worship of the goddess Artemis. After all, classical religion was an affair of cult, and there were prescribed practices that had to be maintained to ensure the appropriateness of the sacrifice. That is, types of animals being worshipped, burnt at the offerings, types of votive offerings placed in the shrine itself.
Recent archaeological discoveries have raised the possibility that humans also may have been sacrificed here.
We have found a lot of animal bones in the Artemisium, which are the remains of the sacrifices. We have found bones of pigs, of cattle, of goats, of sheep, also of deer. But there's one strange thing. We have also found human bones. Not very much, but they exist. The bones are cut or some of the bones are cut, and so they must have something to do with sacrifice or something like that. And there's also one bone which comes from the children.
In 356 BC, 2 centuries after construction first began, the Temple of Artemis came to a fiery end. In what may have been one of history's most notorious cases of arson, a man named Herostratus was believed to have set fire to the complex. But even this incident is cloaked in uncertainty. Some experts argue that nature, not man, was to blame for the demise of the shrine.
It was not Herostratus who set fire to the temple, but lightning, a thunderstorm. And the thunderstorm, a lightning which hits the roof of the temple, easily can set fire to the beams. And of course, the moment a grand fire starts up underneath a marble roof, even the marble would burn, and burn down to chalk.
For the worshippers of Artemis, the pressing question was why the goddess failed to protect her temple. The answer, they concluded, was that she was busy elsewhere. The night of the fire was the very night that Alexander the Great was born. Because the goddess had to preside over Alexander's birth in distant Macedonia, she was unable to prevent her temple from being reduced to ashes. Faced with the destruction of their goddess's sanctuary, the followers of Artemis performed an amazing act of devotion. Within a century, they rebuilt the vast marble temple to exactly the same specifications as its predecessor. It was this incarnation of the temple that was included on the list of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world. It would stand proudly for another 600 years.
When I saw the sacred house of Artemis that towers to the clouds, the other wonders were placed in the shade, for the sun itself has never shone down upon its equal outside Olympus itself. Antipater of Sidon, author, 2nd century BCE.
As long as belief in the goddess Artemis flourished, the temple endured. But with the decline of the Roman Empire, invading barbarians eventually plundered the temple of its contents and tore the building down. The treasure was carried off by sea, but as fate would have it, storms sank all the vessels and the fabulous riches were lost forever. They may still lie somewhere in the depths of the Aegean, a fortune waiting to be found. When we return, a tragic story of a brother and sister and the epic saga of one of the largest tombs ever built in antiquity, a monument to a forbidden love. Of all the 7 wonders of the ancient world, there is one that inspires the belief that love may transcend death. The tomb of Mausolus at Halicarnassus in what is now southwestern Turkey is a structure so imposing that the name Mausolus has crossed the centuries. For since that time, large tombs have been known as mausoleums. At the heart of the story lies the tale of two lovers locked in a desperate bid